biological brains are highly complex and highly efficient. We're going to talk about what technology can teach us about the human mind and what the brain can teach us about technology. Today on the podcast, what if we could see the detailed wiring of a brain and use that topology to peek into the future of artificial intelligence? And conversely, can we use technology to see inside the human brain to support people with their mental health?
Your human brain, which does more than any current artificial intelligence model can do, only takes up as much energy as a flashlight. So imagine if we had computation that was that compact and that low power and that performant.
Mental health affects about 1 in 5 people in the world. When you look at young people, it's over 30%. But mental health has never really had very good ways of measuring it. And that's just a completely unacceptable state of affairs.
I'm Astro Teller, your host and captain of Moonshots, and this is the Moonshot Podcast. Today we're talking about the mind and technology, both what the mind can teach us about technology and how technology can help our minds. To talk with us today, we have Sarah Laszlo. Welcome back to the Moonshot Podcast, Sarah.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me, Astro. I'm so excited.
We're going to go on a really fun little roller coaster of memories and nerd out a little bit. But let's start with, when we met you, we had this moonshot that we were trying that we're going to talk about more on another part of this episode. I sometimes referred to it as the magic hat that we were trying to build.
That.
So tell us a little bit about how you started working with us, at first from the outside.
Yeah, the story of how I started at Google X is a 1 in a million, lottery ticket story. I was a university professor before I came to Google X. I was working on brain biometrics, so using your brain activity as a fingerprint. And that work got way more popular press than academic work usually does. And some of the rapid evaluators at Google X, they heard me on Science Friday, and they thought, hey, we need a neuroscientist, but we're all physicists. We don't know any. This girl sounds cool. She's doing this crazy brain biometric stuff. They heard me on a podcast and called me up. And I was like, who are these people? I don't know. Is this a scam, right? So I checked around. No, it was real. It was actually real. And so they brought me here to work on that. And they had looked at a commercially available brain bioamplifier.
Tell us what a brain bioamplifier is.
Yeah. So if you've ever seen a movie or a TV show where they put all of the sensors on the head and then the squiggly lines come out, that's a brain bioamplifier.
Is that what most people would think of as an EEG?
Yes, that's an EEG, an electroencephalogram.
Yeah.
Yes. And so if you're a physicist and you open an EEG box up, you look in it and it has $5 of electronics in it. And you're like, why does this cost $30,000? And so they and we all thought that we could make one that was just as good, but that was 100, 1,000 times cheaper.
So we can come back to Amber, but the reason that I really wanted you here is your story about what you did next here at X. You went on to do something, even by X standards, that was a little bit different. Tell us about the first inklings of what turned into Valkyrie.
So the first inklings of Valkyrie came maybe 3 or 4 months after Amber. I had to figure out what am I going to do next. And so I spent a bunch of time reading the hottest new academic literature.
And this is maybe 2017?
2019,
okay.
Yes, 2019. Okay. So I got back into what's coming off the presses for the academic literature right now. And the two things that caught my eye were optogenetics. And the other one, which is what turned into Valkyrie, is that Google Brain had just published for the first time the neuroanatomical map of the fruit fly Drosophila at the neuron nanometer resolution. So they took the fruit fly and then they sliced its brain up into 23 million little nanometer thick slices. And then they put every one of those 23 nanometer thick slices into a scanning electron microscope, and they scanned them all at nanometer resolution. So really detailed. And then what you have at that point is a bunch of flat images of a brain. But that doesn't do you any good because you want to see, like, the brain is three-dimensional and you want to see, like, all of the neurons traveling through space. So the really impressive part of what Google Brain did was that they used computer vision to take all of the slices and recreate the 3D map of every neuron in that fly's brain, which was amazing.
And so you had millions of neurons and how they were all connected to each other.
So we didn't have they were all connected to each other. That is one of the first things that Valkyrie did, actually.
Okay, so you have the neurons, and you maybe have some hints about how they're spatially, how they might be connected to each other. So what did you think wearing your Xer hat?
Yeah.
How could I change the world and make the world better using that map? What did you think? Pitch me Valkyrie like I've never heard it before. Why should we spend money on this? Why is it going to be good for the world?
Astro, we're going to make synthetic brains. And right now, we need bigger computers. These foundation models, they're getting enormous. There's two breakthroughs that are possible. One is quantum, one is neuromorphic. We're going to do neuromorphic. We're going to make the brains because there's no quantum computer in existence that can actually do anything at the time. There's brains in existence. We know they exist. We know they can do it. We're going to do it here.
What is neuromorphic computing?
Yeah, so neuromorphic computing is computing that is brain-inspired, where you're trying to make the artificial intelligence as brain-inspired as possible.
You're talking about learning from how brains, in humans, but in other animals and insects as well, work, and then stealing some of those good ideas by analogy and putting them into artificial intelligence.
Yes.
In terms of the problem and the opportunity, tell us a little bit about why use brains as an inspiration for these foundation models. Like, what do we get if that works, and why do we think we'd get it?
Yeah, so foundation models, as I think many people know these days, need a lot of energy. And brains don't. Your human brain, which does more than any current, in the year 2025, artificial intelligence model can do, only takes up as much energy as a flashlight. The fruit fly brain is the size of a sesame seed, and it draws less power than a AA battery. And even with that, a fruit fly, as soon as it's hatched from its little egg, can do autonomous navigation in 3D space with goal direction. So imagine if we had computation that was that compact and that low power and that performant.
So there's something radically more power efficient and radically more space efficient about how biology does computation. As a neuroscientist, do we know what about our brains is enabling that, or do we not really know yet?
I don't think we know. I don't think we know what about our brains enables them to be so energy efficient, which is, like, if you go back in time, part of what was so exciting about Valkyrie, maybe we could figure that out.
I remember that the thing that you said to me that made me go, like, oh, okay, that's probably wrong, but now I'm really interested. The way you put it to me at the time was these huge foundation models that we're starting to build, and even back in 2019, Alphabet was already building these over at Google Brain. The way that they are connected is starting to evolve over time, humans making this evolution happen towards something that looks more and more like a brain. So what if we looked at an actual brain? Might that give us a peek 5 to 10 years into the future of artificial intelligence, helping us to jump forward not only in what we could compute, but also how efficiently we could compute it.
Yeah, I remember this. Actually, I should give Doris Tang, my partner in Valkyrie, credit for that, because Doris made this figure that showed the trajectory of the foundation models in terms of, like, someone in academia had done a literature review about, like, the model over time on the x-axis and how brain-like it was on the y-axis, and it had been, like, you know, steadily up and to the right. And she said, what if we jump to the end of that?
So you have this hypothesis, which sounds crazy, quite possibly isn't true, but we could kind of pre-agree if it happened to be true, it would be a really big deal.
Yes, that's right. That was the pitch.
Now what?
Yeah, so now what? Oh, man. It was so exciting for me. I was like a little
Fruit fly.
fruit fly. I was like something. I was thinking about Brownie in motion. I was like a little particle, just like just jumping all over the place. And I was only when you start a project at X, there's just you doing it, and so I had to choose like what am I going to do. And so then the first thing I did was I decided yes, I was going to try to compute a draft of the connectome, a draft of how every neuron in the fruit fly brain was connected to every other neuron.
Because you had the points.
Yeah.
But not the lines between the points. You had the neurons, but not the way that all these neurons were connected in the fruit fly.
Yeah.
So if your hypothesis was that this connectivity map was going to be our secret weapon, then you needed first to like finish the map.
Yes, that's right. So we had, if you think about it too in like graph terms, we had like the positions of all the nodes, but we didn't know where any of the edges were. And so we had to figure out where the edges were.
How long did that take you? Was it hard or easy?
So how long did it take is a hard question to answer because we had a draft of it really fast, but we never got the final version.
So you like asymptotically approached correct?
We did. It was scientific, right? Like we did the best we could. We did the first principle component first. And then you would never get them all if you worked on it for 100 years. Maybe in 100 years you'd get it. I think we were close enough that it didn't matter because I think I was wrong that the connectome was all you needed. So even if you had a perfect one, I don't think it would. That was enough. I think I thought just having the connectome would get you a lot, and it got you a little, but not enough.
You have this, nascent project. You have this vision. Mm-hmm. You make the map, but the next step is you have to do something with the map. The whole hypothesis is you can use the map to do something that would make everyone go, what? So what did you try and how did it work?
Yeah, so the fruit fly Drosophila, its brain looks like a little bow tie. And if you imagine a bow tie in your head, there's the two little like the little bows coming out of the knot in the center. And all of the bows, which is like 80-90% of the fruit fly brain, is the visual system. So the visual system of the fruit fly Drosophila is really, really well developed. We never wanted to try to make like a language model out of it, even though, as you said, even at that time, Google was developing large language models because fruit flies don't talk, but they have an amazing visual system. And you actually connected us within Google X, the wing team, because the wing team have exactly the problem we were trying to solve. They're trying to have these autonomous drones flying around and they need to have really good vision, but they only have onboard compute.
So this is a camera on a drone, a few hundred feet up. It's looking down and it needs to know, is that a cloud? Is that a tree? Is that a safe place where I can leave the package? That's the fundamental question. They're at.
Yeah, and so they have exactly the problems that fruit flies have to solve. They're flying around, they have to figure out where to land, they don't have very much power and compute. So it was like a really good alignment. And so we started working with the wing team on doing their image segmentation problem. So looking at the data from the onboard camera and segmenting every pixel in it. Is this pixel the driveway, or is this a bush, or is this the street, or is this the roof? So that's what we did next.
How did it work?
Great. We did it.
You didn't just do it.
Yeah.
It worked surprisingly well. Unpack, some of like how well it worked, both in terms of efficiency, the size of the model, what it would take to run it, and also like its correctness.
Yeah. So the correctness was about equivalent to what Wing had at the time. And the thing that was always incredible about Valkyrie is that we used what's called the reservoir computing technique, which means reservoir computers have their pros and cons. One of the pros of them is they train really fast. And so if you think about like the state-of-the-art visual like segmentation models at that time, which were, I believe, convolutional neural networks, you have to train them for like 20,000, 50,000, 100,000 steps. With reservoir computers, you can do it in like 200. If you can't train a reservoir computer in 200 steps, you should stop.
So remind us, what's reservoir computing?
Yeah. So normally in machine learning, when you think about like the data centers churning, what they're doing is learning the weights in a neural network. So they're learning if two artificial neurons in a neural network are connected, how strongly are they connected? Reductively, the neuron for dog and the neuron for bark should be strongly connected. The neuron for dog and the neuron for meow should be weakly connected. And they're learning that. Learning those weights is what takes up the majority of the training compute for big networks. In reservoir computers, what you do is you just make an enormous set of weights and you freeze them and you don't train them. And you just hope that because the set is large enough, by coincidence, you will get the right pathways through.
One of the fears that I remember that the Valkyrie team had early on was maybe, reservoir computing is often just a random set of connections, and there's just so many of them that they can kind of use the overabundance of relationships so they don't have to do much learning.
Yes.
And your fear was, well, what if when we use the fly brain, we're just basically doing reservoir computing?
Yeah.
I mean, you knew we were doing it to some extent, but what if a random network would get you the same answer?
Yeah.
Then it's not very interesting you're using a fly brain.
Yeah, spoiler alert, that's what happened. But
not at first.
Not at first.
So you've made this model for helping wing look down.
Yeah.
It works about as well, but it can be trained wildly easier, and it can be run much faster with much lower energy.
Yeah, that's what happened. Right. Yeah.
So maybe you just got lucky. Did you try it again?
Yeah, we did it so many times. We had so many, because we also did it for agility, or mineral is what it's known as now.
Remind the audience what that moonshot was. That was also here at X.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Agility was the computational agriculture moonshot. If people have seen the videos from X of the cool robots out in the strawberry fields, they had some machine vision on board. That's what our part of agility was.
So this is, instead of a drone looking for where to land, this is a robot in a field looking at plants and trying to decide how healthy is that plant? Is that plant infected maybe with a bug, something like that? And you were trying to make something that was at least as accurate as what they had. Yeah. And again, wildly more energy efficient.
So agility was looking at like strawberry health, and that's like exactly what a fruit fly knows. Like you all know, everyone knows if they have some rotten strawberries in the kitchen, the fruit flies will go right to them. So like we thought for sure a fruit fly knows this. We can teach a fruit fly to do this. And we still, I think to this day, the best result we got out of Valkyrie was we trained the is this a strawberry plant or not model for agility in 6 steps. I did a live demo of it in the X All Hands. People were going crazy. And when we did that, I was so afraid that I had made a mistake somewhere. We brought so many people in from all over to look at the code base because I was sure I had made a mistake.
You're going along, you're having these amazing results. Yeah. As you say, it was so good that you, because you're very intellectually honest, you kept saying this is too good to be true. Yeah. Something feels like it's wrong here. Yeah. You ended up finding something was wrong. Yeah. What did you find and how did you find it?
Yeah. So we ended up finding, as I said in the spoiler alert, that you really didn't need the fly brain at all. You could do this with a random reservoir computer. And a random reservoir computer was just as good at this, as sometimes better than the fly brain. The way we found it was right around this time when we were thinking it was too good to be true. That was get serious. Part of the thing in X is you're doing something crazy, but if you show evidence that it's actually going to work, we're going to pour gasoline on that fire and we're going to go. And this was pour gasoline on the fire time. And so we had to be really sure before we started to pour gasoline on it. And so we had some incredible interns on the team, and we had them go back and redo every model that we had done. And one of the interns was an expert in sort of model interpretability and credit assignment and why is a model doing well. We had them go back and redo every experiment that we had done up to that point with just a random network. And when they did it like that, the random networks were as good in every single case.
With the right kind of random
With the right kind of random.
Because you had tried random networks before that hadn't had nearly as good performance.
Yeah, so earlier on, all the PhD students in reservoir computing at the time were trying to figure out how to randomly compose the networks. And one of the things we found that was actually positive for Valkyrie that was interesting and to us was that they found, and actually a PhD student at X, an X AI intern had studied this and had found this result, was that what's called the sparsity of a reservoir computer matters a lot. So how many of the random connections are zero matters a lot. And ideal value, Astro, that this PhD student defined using physics and mathematical principles, the ideal value of that sparsity was identical to what we observed in the fly brain. And we were like, oh man, there it is. It's all there. We didn't have to do physics and math. We just had to observe neuroscience and look at the fly brain, right? So that was like, oh my God, we're on to something. But the thing about that is, so once we figured that out, like it was way better than just like the first thing you would try if you were going to do this is a random normal distribution or a random uniform. It was better than either of those. So we were like, yeah, it's better than random. It's actually not better than random if you know the right way to be random.
Yeah, so you did learn something from the fly brain in the end about the right kind of random.
Yeah.
But the fact beyond that it was coming from a brain turned out to matter less, at least with respect to its connectivity.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a lot more going on in the brain than just the connectivity.
Yes.
I love how you came to us to tell us that Valkyrie should be turned off. Do you remember what you said to me?
I don't remember because it was very emotional, and so the memories aren't very crystallized.
I tell this story of what you said all the time because I think it's one of the best, most elegant kills we've ever had. You said, I still believe that this is true, but the evidence that we thought we had for justifying continuing to ramp, it turns out to be wrong. And so even though I believe the hypothesis here is true, I don't have any evidence for the hypothesis. So we should shut this down, not in the sense that we've proved we can't learn things from brains that will help artificial intelligence. You still, at the time, believed that. I bet you still do. You just said, we haven't proved anything, it turns out.
Yeah.
And so we shouldn't be ramping up something on the basis of non-evidence.
Wow. I don't remember saying that to you at all. But you're right. I do still believe that like we can learn a lot from the brain about how to do. I actually still believe. I greatly believe that one of the biggest missteps that the current AI craze has gone is that they have given up on doing neuromorphism. And I think you should never believe anyone that makes a prediction about artificial intelligence. So don't believe what I'm about to say. My personal belief is 20, 50 years from now, we'll look back at this and be like, why were they doing that? Like they were just trying to make it bigger. They should have been trying to make it more neuromorphic. Like that's what I think will happen eventually. Still to this day.
Valkyrie started in 2019, as you said.
Yeah.
We're sitting here in the end of 2025.
Yeah.
Technology has changed a lot in the last 6 to 8 years.
Yeah.
Do you think it's ready for a revisit?
It for sure is worth revisiting. I believe DeepMind is revisiting it because of the energy potential.
So you brought a piece of show and tell.
I did.
Tell me what it is.
So I have here with me a 3D print of a fruit fly neuron, and this is not an artist's rendering. This is an actual, like, scaled up visualization of what an actual neuron, an actual fruit fly. I've kept with me now for 6 or 7 years through many moves around California and now out to Texas. It almost makes me emotional even explaining it. So the reason I love this object is because there were probably 200 people that all had to work between when this fruit fly was flying around and living its life to me holding this in my hand. And every single one of them had an impossible job, and every single one of them had to be perfect at it. The technicians who cut up the fruit fly brain and prepared it. We had the electron microscopy people who took the images of the brain. They actually, because there were 23 million images that needed to be taken, you can't have a student sitting there feeding 23 million slides into a microscope. So they had to build robots to take the slides and put them into the microscope. So there was a robotics team. Then once the robotics was done, there was a bunch of radiologists that had to transmit, like make the images. Then once the images were made, you had a huge team of people in Google Brain who did the magic to stitch the 2D images together into 3D. Then you had my team that came in and took the map that was very raw at that time and made it something that was easier to navigate through and play around with. Then you had the incredible people in the design kitchen here at X who worked with us to take this very raw, very researchy set of data and put it into CAD so it could go into the 3D printers. Then you had a 3D printing team that was and this was very difficult structure to 3D print because it's very delicate, it's very thin and very delicate. And so they had to use specialized 3D printing techniques. So you had all of these people doing something that no one had ever done before. more over the period of years in order to make this object.
Wonderful. So you were in academia for a while. Then you were at X, which is incredibly different than academia. Then you were at Visa for a while, which is very different from X. Now you're starting your own startup company. I really love to hear what parts of what you loved about X might you try to transplant over into your startup company as you get off the ground.
Yeah, I think the thing from X that I want to recreate in my company the most, especially right now when we're starting it, is just the unbridled joy of when you're starting something new and crazy. I'll tell you truly from the bottom of my heart, Astro, the 2 years that I spent reporting to Phil Watson in the rapid evaluation team were the best years of my life.
First of all, thank you, Sarah. It means a ton to me.
You're welcome.
How are you going to try to create that? I mean, you are a fundamentally joyful person.
Thank you.
So, I think you will inherently do this, but how will you consciously try to fill up your company with that sort of joyful excitement for doing something new and crazy, being an explorer?
Yeah, I think something I'm good at is figuring out what will make other people be having that joy and let them do it. And so actually yesterday, one of the highlights of my trip, a very good friend of mine, I was trying to recruit her to come work at the startup. And she was like, what do you want me to do? And I said, whatever you want. Let them do what they want to do, because that's when they're going to come up with the stuff that's the most creative. They're going to be intrinsically motivated to work on it. They're going to feel ownership of it. And I feel like this is something that I want to replicate, that I'm excited about replicating.
I agree. That is kind of one of the fundamental thesis elements of X, which is what you just described sounds deeply inefficient, which is why almost everybody doesn't do it. And they're right if you measure over short timescales. If it's like the house is burning down, you don't have time for creativity and everyone just do your own jam. But when you're playing a longer game, that kind of joy, leaving people that space, including the inefficiencies that can come from not having a command and control structure, creates a totally different kind of tailwind that's much bigger. As you know, it's part of why we ask for only 10x things here at X, because that is a short circuit, cheat. That if you ask for that and then don't tell people what 10x you're looking for, everyone will find something that lights their hearts on fire. Sarah, this has been a blast. I feel like we could do this for 6 hours.
Absolutely. Easy. Is it already? Oh my, the time went so fast.
I just want to say I'm so grateful for the time that you had here with us.
Yes.
And we're wishing you the absolute best in the startup, which I know is still in stealth mode.
Yeah.
And when you're done, I hope you come back here.
This will be the first place, I promise you that.
Excellent.
All right, thank you so much, Astro.
Thank you, Sarah. I have really fond memories of that project, and I'm so impressed with the kind of intellectual honesty in closing down a project for the right reasons based on the evidence. That's how innovation at its best should work. Next up, we're going to talk about Project Amber, which is actually the original project that pulled Sarah into X. And we're going to talk with the leader of that project, Obi Felten. Welcome back, Obi.
Oh, thank you.
Let's dive in with Amber first. What was the what if behind it?
So Amber was started in the rapid eval team, like so many other explorations, by a neuroscientist, Sarah, and a hardware engineer, Gabi, who said, what if we rebuild an EEG device that can measure brainwaves and make it really cheap and really easy to use? And they came to me because they weren't quite sure what the right use cases would be to hone down into. They had lots and lots of ideas, from tracking sleep to measuring depression to speeding up learning. That was a fun one. Could we learn languages 3 times faster and so on? And so I helped them with that use case exploration. But the what if started with a technical question, and then it was what are the big problems in the world that we can solve with this tech?
So it started with, could we do this? Mm-hmm. And then as it became more clear, maybe we could do this, then you helped them hone in on something very specific. And what was that specific possible benefit that we could get from that possible technology?
So with Amber, we looked at all these different use cases, from sleep to depression, to language learning. And so it transpired that this was actually a potential way of measuring mental health. And mental health affects about 1 in 5 people in the world globally. And when you look at young people, it's over 30%. So that's really terrifying. But mental health has never really had very good ways of measuring it. So it's one of the few areas of healthcare where we're still asking people how they're doing, right? So imagine like instead of doing an echocardiogram, your cardiologist is like, so Astro, how has your heart been in the last 2 weeks? Is it a little bit better or a little bit worse? That is exactly what we do to people with depression, like, is your sleep better? Is it worse? Are you feeling sadder or less sad? And humans can actually tell you how they feel right this moment, but they're not very good at computing an average over a period of time.
I don't want to pry, but I also know that it's deeply important to you. Your husband, Toby, has had mental health challenges, as so many people around the world have, and that this has been sort of a big part of your life and part of the inspiration for Amber. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, I worked in mental health way before Amber. And part of the inspiration for Amber is like, could we detect earlier whether someone's struggling with mental health? Was my husband. So he was diagnosed with mental illness when we were 30. But looking back, his first episode was in his late teens, like before I even met him. And so there was a period where, we were together for 10 years before he got diagnosed. And we just had no ideas. Like this was the 90s, and people talk less about mental health than they do today. But it's still not uncommon today. About 75% of people who develop mental health problems, they show up under the age of 24. But it, on average, takes about a decade until people get treatment, especially for more severe mental illness. And that's just a completely unacceptable state of affairs. So I got really interested in youth mental health and like early detection and what happens when you detect earlier. And the outcomes are very clear. It's like if you treat someone's first episode of depression, they're much less likely to have recurring depression. So that's when I first got really interested in measurement, because I was working in tech, right, where everything was measurable. And yet here was this area of healthcare that was basically still relying on asking people how they were doing. So it was very personal.
So I totally get that you can't like somehow take like a blood draw, stick it under a microscope and find out if I'm depressed.
Well, some people say you can, but I'm pretty skeptical about it.
So far we can't.
Yeah.
And so the what if was, could we make some kind of, I remember I joked with you in the early days, it was a magic hat, but something you could put on as easily as you would put on a hat that would look inside your head and be able to tell whether you had clinical levels of, at first it was depression. Why do we think that would even be possible? Like, what could you see using a magic hat that could possibly relate to how I'm, like, my first person subjective experience?
So let's start with the science. So EEG is a very old technology. It's been around for over 100 years. And it's been used mostly in neuroscience research, where researchers look at the electrical activity in your brain, and they look at the different brain waves, and they also look at them in relation to events. So for example, say you're playing a video game and you win or you lose. What happens right after you find out whether you win or you lose, there's a little spike in the brainwave. So it goes up and down. It's called an event-related potential. And it turns out that when you have depression, there's a phenomenon called anhedonia. And we know what that's like experientially. So we feel down, we lack motivation, getting off the sofa and going out for a walk becomes much harder. We enjoy things less, we're out for that walk, the sun is shining, the birds are tweeting, and everything's kind of meh. So that's called anhedonia, and almost every depressed person experiences that to varying degrees. It turns out you can see anhedonia in the brainwave. So in that little event-related spike, after you win or you lose, a person without depression, that spike will be higher and will be longer. And in a depressed person, it's compressed in both directions. And researchers had known this, so there was a body of evidence around it. We read the papers. It's a pretty robust phenomenon. But they had always done it on groups of people because EEG is very noisy data. So they would combine a whole bunch of people and say, this group on average looks like this, and this group on average looks like that, which is not useful in a medical context because I want to be able to tell whether you, Astro, are depressed or not. So what we did is use machine learning to interpret those data to clean them up, but also make them more interpretable so that we could be sensitive at an individual level.
Okay, let's say for a second that it works perfectly. Is that actually going to make the world better, or is it really just going to flood the world with more people when we don't have enough talk therapists to begin with?
Yeah, so this is kind of where it gets really interesting, right? So how do you get things out of the lab when you prove it can work in the lab into the real world and make it truly useful? So I probably did about 100 user interviews myself for this project, like interviewing primary care doctors, pediatricians, teenagers, women with postpartum depression. We talked to therapists, etc. And that's a theme that came up over and over again. So one is we realized there was going to be a lot of issues in how do you get this out into the world? How do you make EEG work in a primary care office? And we can talk a bit more about that. But second, people kept saying, well, yes, there's a lot of people with depression who are not even getting treatment today. So if you can do early detection, that's a good thing, but you're just going to make the system worse. And
you just increase the wait times.
You're just going to increase the wait time. Yeah, exactly. So the system can't cope already. And that's what ultimately led me to leave and start a care delivery startup. So because I realized that while mental health measurement is a massive unsolved problem in the world, and for various reasons, I do think it needs to be cracked, everyone kept saying, like, this is probably not the biggest problem in the world.
Earlier in the process, there were other alternatives, weren't there? Like, if I have a magic hat that can see how I'm doing, and I'm trying different pills that are supposed to help my mental health, right now, I have to take those pills for a long period of time, try to watch myself. I'm working with a psychiatrist. If the hat was like, oh, this is not helping, stop taking that pill, try this other one, like, couldn't there be a closed feedback loop?
Yes, so we did actually look at that. So it turns out diagnosis, you don't get paid very well, and people were much less interested in that. Even to the point where a pediatrician who later became my co-founder said to me, like, look, I can tell 70% of the kids in my practice have mental health issues, but the wait list at Kaiser is 6 months. But she said once they get into care, or if I, as the primary care provider, have to prescribe them antidepressants, there's this like trial and error of like getting the medication right. In the case of my husband, it took several years until they got the medication even vaguely right. And so if you could speed that up, that would be great. And so we did actually look at, like, could you do more ongoing measurement? And can you help with ongoing management of the disease and produce better outcomes faster? For that, you don't just want to have EEG, because EEG is always like a point in time. So that's when we also started working with the Verily team and adding in wearable data. Because looking at sleep data, looking at activity data from like your Oura Ring or your Whoop or your Apple Watch can also be giving you other interesting insights into mental health. It turns out that is a potential business, but it was super nascent when we were working on it. So people were talking about there might be these codes that might be coming out. And what I learned in healthcare is you need a code so that...
The CMS code?
Yeah, a CMS code, exactly. So that
yeah.
CMS says this is a thing and people should pay for it. That's not the same as people actually paying for it, because the insurance company then has to also agree that they're going to cover that code. And that process from we're going to create a code to there's like meaningful coverage is like a decade plus.
Which slows up innovation in the field, obviously.
That is one of the reasons why, like, I read one very depressing paper that medical innovation takes about 20 years from when the innovation happens in the lab to when it's fully adopted by clinicians in clinical practice and paid for by insurance. And ultimately, if it's not paid for by insurance, it doesn't grow in healthcare. Nothing grows.
Leaving aside whether it was solving the problem, at its best, do you feel like Amber ever got even a partially good signal on this person is clinically depressed or this person is not clinically depressed? How much is that doable? Just for like someone who's listening to this who might be thinking of restarting their own moonshot. Possible?
Yes, definitely possible. It was kind of magical, actually. Like when we ran our own clinical studies as well as worked with academics who were doing this research. And when we got the first data set back, it was only 100 people, but I remember Sarah came and showed me the charts, and she's like, look at this one and look at that. And just with the naked eye, you could see there was clearly a difference, and it was super, super exciting.
Tell me about building the magic hat. Like, having an idea for it is one thing, but you had to go to the design kitchen and work with people to actually like do the prototypes. Take me through that a little bit.
Yeah. So first of all, it wasn't me. It was Gabi, who was originally working in the design kitchen. So she was the queen of the design kitchen. So she's a hardware engineer, but a very creative one. She was also an artist. And so she was already thinking very much out of the box with the devices. So this is one of the first prototypes she built, is this, where it was a strap that was just holding in the sensors. So the only idea was like, how can we attach the sensors so that they can actually be held close enough to your skull so we can get a read? And then we hired a seamstress, and she turned it into what's essentially a swim cap, right? So you can see, you can put it on your head. I can try. Let's see. I'll try putting it on my head. So you put it on, and then you have the strap under your chin that you tighten. And the reason that's important is because, do I look completely ridiculous?
No, it's okay. I mean,
yes.
I wouldn't recommend it for the Met Gala, but...
Yeah. So the reason that's important is because inside here, you have the strip with the sensors, and those sensors need to have contact with the skin.
So that just causes those not very sharp little gold bits to go through your hair and make sure they're directly touching your scalp.
And that's why they're quite long, because we discovered
to get through your hair,
yeah. And which raises all sorts of interesting challenges, that this design doesn't work for all hairs, and how do we make it more accessible to everything, etc. But this works for most hair types. And these sensors, we originally bought them and then we designed our own ones because they were a significant part of the cost base was actually the sensors.
Because they're gold-plated?
They're gold-plated, and they were just super expensive because they were designed for very small runs of neuroscience devices, and we wanted to make, millions of these eventually. So that's the cap, that was the hat. And then the other part is this, which is the bioamp. So that's where all the data goes into it gets collected, and it gets processed.
So that's not, the bioamp is not where the ultimate machine learning happened. That's the place that takes the analog signals and makes them into a good digital form so the machine learning could then do something with.
Yeah, and it's basically just a mini computer. We actually, part of the reason we built our own bioamp is because we wanted raw signal, and a lot of the devices you could buy in the market, because we didn't necessarily want to build our own device, but then we couldn't find anything that was cheap enough, high quality enough, and gave us the raw signal. And that was important for the machine learning part. We wanted all the noise, and we wanted to do the denoising in machine learning as opposed to some sort of rudimentary denoising that would cut out potentially valuable signal. So the goal was, can we make an EEG device that is that gathers the data at the same fidelity as a $70,000 device that's used in neuroscience labs or in hospitals, for example, for epilepsy, but can we do it for less than $700? And we did. We built a device where the bioamp and the cap that with the sensors was about $400 or $500 at small scale. So that was really, really exciting because you're talking like several orders of magnitude, which meant you could make it cheap enough so you could deploy it in primary care, but you could also deploy it in low-income countries where there's actually very little EEG being collected today because the devices are too expensive for most clinics.
You could actually see depression through one of these hats. But you could see things other than depression. What else did you look at?
Yeah. So we actually expanded from depression to anxiety. And the story behind this was, whilst we ran our own clinical studies, but clinical studies take a very long time. So one of our researchers had an existing data set. So we bought the anonymized data set from him. And we were trying to analyze it using our machine learning models. And the model kept failing. And then one day, Nina, the intern, came to me and she said, Obi, I can tell you why the model's failing. And I said, why? And she said, it's because most of the data is anxiety patients. I took a look at the data set, and there's a whole bunch of anxiety people. There's some people who have both depression and anxiety, which makes it confusing. And then there's actually a pretty small number of people who just have depression. And so I said to her, like, and she was so stressed when she told me this because she thought she was bringing me really, really bad news and that I was going to be really upset and yell at her. My principle is you never yell at anyone who brings you bad news, like never shoot the messenger. You want people to come to you with bad news. I'm much more paranoid about not getting the bad news. So I said, I mean, that sounds like bad news. So what do you think we should do? And she said, well, I think we should see if the model works for anxiety. Like, probably twice that speed she said it. That's how nervous she was. So I said, yeah, go do that. And a week later, she came back and she said, it actually works for anxiety, which as a product person, I was super excited about. Because of course, if you're a clinician and you're trying to assess this person's mental health, like it's much more useful if you can assess the depression and the anxiety at the same time, especially because there's a lot of people who have both. So that was a fail that turned into a win.
That's a great example, first, of somebody overcoming this sort of psychological safety, this sense they would get yelled at, and then having this bad news thing turned into a good news. I remember in the early days, speaking of how long it takes to do these clinical studies, that I had proposed something, which you never actually did, but I remember saying, what if at first we don't try to get the hat to do something clinical, which is going to take a long time. What if we do something non-clinical just to see if we can do something surprising with the hat? So my somewhat farcical suggestion was, why don't we have people like imagine an animal and see if we can draw a picture of the animal on a screen just from looking at their brain. Obviously, that wouldn't have been commercially useful, but it would have allowed you to get started a lot faster.
So one is there was papers on that already. Like it's some of my favorite neuroscience papers is actually that. And the reason I was personally less excited about it is because at this point, maybe in my X career, if you look at the arc of the time that I had spent at X, I'd spent a lot of time on things that were, technology magic, but took a very long time to go to market. So I think I got impatient. I was like, no, we actually need to build something where we know it's going to work. It's not just going to be a paper that we can publish. And so I was very, very focused on that. I think I underestimated just quite how slow healthcare would be.
When Amber was up and running, but still early stage, what were the kill criteria?
So we had 3 kill criteria. So one is, could we technically make this work? Could we make a EEG device at the right quality? And could we use machine learning to interpret the data? The second one was, can we turn this into a product that would be useful in the world? And then the third one was, is there a business here? Like, how would we get paid for this?
And correct me if I'm wrong, but in the end, the answer was definitively, technically, we could do it. From a product perspective, while we didn't fully chase it down, the answer was probably yes, we could do it. There weren't any showstoppers. It was really the business, being able to turn it into a really huge, enduring business, that's where we felt like Amber had to be turned off. Is that right?
So on the technical side, we did make really great progress. Like we did build a low-cost, easy-to-use device that put out great signal. We did build machine learning models that could detect not just depression, but also anxiety. On the product side, it was a little bit mixed, I would say. So we interviewed a lot of people with lived experience of depression, young people, women with postpartum depression, and other groups. We interviewed a lot of clinicians, therapists, pediatricians, primary care docs, and so on. And it turned out that even though they liked the idea of a measurement, there was lots of questions. So the primary care doctors, for example, were like, okay, so how do I measure EEG in my practice? Do I need to have a special room that's shielded? Or can you put this on a cart just like the blood pressure machine? So there's a lot of very practical questions. They also asked, how am I going to get reimbursed for this? Is insurance going to pay for it? The patients, some people loved it. They loved the idea that there would be this device that would give them a definitive answer, right? There's sometimes people say, oh, depression's just in your head, right? Sometimes it's pretty dismissive, it's not a real disease, even though it kills more people than cancer, and even though it's much more debilitating than many other diseases. And so for them, having a biomarker that says, yes, I have this thing, was helpful. And others found it super freaky. I don't want some black box to tell me that I have depression.
So the technical part, yes. Product mixed. The business was
Yeah,
the,
and then the
weakest.
Yeah, the business was the weakest because in healthcare, what mostly gets paid for is still care. So like more than 90% of all the cost in healthcare is for care delivered by a human. It's called fee for service. And we were looking at other things. So first we got really interested in early detection. We got really interested in diagnosis. There was various issues with that, but you also can't get paid very much for that because you're competing with what's a paper questionnaire, the PHQ-9, that is free. And even if you get paid for ongoing monitoring, it's not a massive business. So I would say on the business side, the companies in mental health that have grown have all been care delivery companies. And there is a few in the measurement space, including some that are doing really interesting things with voice biomarkers. And so for me, the kill criteria in the end that we hit was that we realized the biggest problem was that wasn't the measurement. The biggest problem in mental health is that we don't have enough providers. But the business side kind of mirrors that, right? Like there's just like a lot more money in care delivery than there is in measurement.
We did choose to share those things that we learned from the Amber experience with the world. Remind us why we decided to share it, what we shared, and what people have said back to us over time about that.
It's interesting. I worked on so many things at X, and most of them like never saw the light of day, and most of them we never, like I've probably forgotten by now. I felt super strongly that we should share Amber for two reasons. So one is a little bit similar to another project that we had done, Foghorn, where we had discovered some things that the scientific community didn't know about. I just felt like we should do that, right? Like, so all these poor grad students poring over EEG chart, we published a paper with the method that we use to clean it up. And we just thought that would be useful to the world, and we wanted to get it out. But we couldn't just randomly publish a paper on EEG, right? Like we had to explain like what the context was, why we were looking at this, and so on. And so the other reason I wanted to do it is because I still had the hope that although we couldn't find an application now, that someone else might be able to. And thankfully, the team was really up for that. So all the hardware is available on GitHub. The software that we wrote, that's like the sort of clinician interface, is also on GitHub. And we had built about 50 devices for our own clinical studies that we then didn't need, and we gave them to a nonprofit that does EEG research in the Global South, where there's just not enough EEG research, full stop, and there's often not a neuroscience lab, right? Like if you're going into rural India, like having a device like ours that might not be as comprehensive as some of the other devices, but can give you something is literally better than nothing. So I felt super strongly about that. And then sharing the user research, I thought was also an important point that, yes, we do need better measurement and we need care. We need other things. And so we published it in a blog post, and then we linked to the GitHub repositories, and we, linked to the nonprofit that we worked with, and so on.
So you shut down Amber. Talk to us about how that turned into the company Flourish that you started on the outside. What was that bridge like for you as you left X, but sort of inspired by what you had learned?
I mean, Flourish Labs in many ways is a direct evolution out of Amber. I was still really passionate about measurement, and in fact, the first product we built at Flourish Labs was a measurement app. But the intent was to actually always add in care as well. I'd come to the conviction that, one, we need more clinicians. We just need more people than the therapists that we have today. We did a ton of user-centric design. So actually creating with young people and figuring out like what they wanted. And they said, yes, we are interested in the measurement piece. We like that self-insight, but we really need a different kind of care. And the different kind of care that we ended up building is peer support, which as a concept has been around for a long time. If you think of Alcoholics Anonymous, that's peer support, right? People who are not trained at all, but share a lived experience of having been through a battle with alcoholism, and they support each other. And there's countless papers that show that it worked, but it's not part of the healthcare system today. And so what we did is we developed a training program entirely online that trained young adults to become peer supporters who had their own experiences with mental illness or addiction. And then we had a telehealth service where you could access peer support, which sounds like so simple, but it didn't exist. I mean, it's kind of astonishing to me that it didn't exist. And then the third thing we did is we got insurance to pay for it. So because even when peer support existed, it was either people doing it on a volunteer basis just for free, or it was like at very small scale, funded with grants or, as part of a federally qualified health clinic, et cetera. So that's what we did.
Maybe let's go back to the beginning now of how you found X, and sort of like experiences in the early days of X.
Well, even before you and I met, I was working for Google in Europe. I was running consumer marketing, so overseeing Chrome and launching and then growing Chrome and Android and Google Maps and other Google consumer products. And I loved my job, but I missed being close to engineering because I'd been a product manager in a previous life. And so I was in Mountain View and I bumped into Megan Smith. And Megan said, "Oh, Obi, I've been meaning to tell you there's this team. They're all secret. Nobody knows what they're working on, but they're working on self-driving cars and some other stuff. And you should meet this guy, Astro." So I remember we did a video call and I sat in London in this tiny little phone booth and you just painted this picture of these projects. You were just like, yes, we're working on self-driving cars and we're working on internet access from balloons and we think we're going to do a drone project and there's this team that's got like a contact lens and we think we can measure glucose and tear fluid. And I was like, oh my God, these projects sound amazing. And then I also asked you like, oh, that sounds really interesting. So, how are you going to take this into the world? Like, are self-driving cars legal? What do you need to do to fly balloons over lots of countries? And are you going to partner with phone companies or compete with them? And you said, oh, we don't have anyone working on that stuff. Why don't you come and help us? So that's how I came here. And I came for 6 months because I wasn't committed.
What was the title you and I settled on that you had for, I think, an entire decade?
Yes, an entire decade. It turned out to be very flexible. So I was head of getting moonshots ready for contact with the real world. Of course, I had a real title that's like in the HR system, right? But it was actually surprisingly descriptive of what I did because here I was in this lab where people were experimenting with really interesting technology and how that technology might be deployed in the world. But they had a lot of scientists and a lot of engineers, and they didn't really have any people at the time that were not scientists or engineers. And that was sort of thinking about like, okay, so what happens when this hits the real world? Which in this case of self-driving cars was, how do we make it safe to test a robot car in an ordinary street, right? The stakes are high. We had to figure out the legal frameworks. We had to figure out the business models. I remember you saying, like, don't kill things with spreadsheets. We want to kill them with fire. But we still needed some sort of idea of, like, how this might become self-sustaining. And so it turned out there was plenty of problems for me to work on.
Obi, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for everything you've done for X and for coming here today and reminiscing with me.
So fun and always so lovely to see you, Astro.
I am so excited about the future of how the human mind and the artificial minds that humanity is working to create can teach each other and co-amplify. Personally, I'm not a big believer that in the end we're going to be making artificial wetware brains. That said, there's something about how the human mind works that we still have a lot to learn from. And as we understand how the human brain works better, we're going to be able to take those learnings as engineering ideas over to the field of artificial intelligence. And I think that's going to cause a huge burst forward. Next time on the Moonshot Podcast, right beneath our feet lies humanity's next frontier. Our infrastructure, energy, water, we depend so much on the earth and what happens in it.
When I first learned about geothermal, I was like, this product is amazing. We thought, how could one go about digging a 300 to 500 foot hole in a cheaper, easier way?
This is the Moonshot Podcast, a peak action production for X, the Moonshot Factory, with me, Astro Teller. You can find more episodes wherever you get your podcasts and on our YouTube channel. If you want to take your own moonshots, we've developed a masterclass certificate course. Check it out in the show notes below. If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to subscribe. It helps other people find out about this series.